Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I'm joined by Greg Cass, aka EyeOnCanon, to discuss the new documentary, Music by John Williams. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it's time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost conversations. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. We have an exciting episode for you all to listen to here, chatting all things John Williams in the new documentary, Music by John Williams. Gotta get the title right, guys. On Disney Plus right now. It's done by Amblin and Lucasfilm, so a real mix of John Williams is probably some of his greatest collaborators, and George Lucas and Steven Spielberg kind of helming this documentary here and shepherding us through the life and times of John Williams, the maestro, the man, the myth, the legend, the one that is probably the music that you hear in your head all the time when you're thinking about film score music, or if you head to, let's say, Disney or Universal Studios, the theme parks, you're probably hearing his music in some way, shape, or form. So yes, we're here to chat about that in our main topic of today's episode. Greg Cass, EyeOnCanon on Instagram from the Long Take Review podcast, joins the show to chat about our experiences and memories with John Williams over the years, our favorite scores, what we liked about the documentary, things that we didn't know about the guy, because frankly, he had a really interesting or very private life, I should say, with some interesting things along the way that have happened that made him the person that we know and love at almost 90, 92, 93. Gosh, uh, crazy. And like I say in the conversation that we have, like, may John Williams always stay on this earth in some way, whether he through dark side, unnatural means, or just thereby the legacy of John Williams continuing on through his music and the influence that he will have on artists and artistry in the near future. Before we get into that conversation, did have some news to chat about in the upcoming, in the upcoming Lucasfilm and Star Wars space, of course, which is that our probably dubbed segment, Cloud City Gossip. I'm just getting so flustered here because I wanted to get to the news here. There's so many cool things that have been announced in the last couple of days here. But first and foremost, I did want to note again that Skeleton Crew will be coming out on December 3rd with 2 new episodes, and that will start the Skeleton Crew season here on Force Ghost Conversations. We were starting to get a lot of guests lined up for this fun adventure serial series that's going to be, I think, really good for the Star Wars fan base to acquaint ourselves with the love and joy of Star Wars again. So I really can't wait for that show to drop and to just break down all the fun themes and details that come with it. Skeleton Crew coming out very soon here, folks. But also, kind of a surprise announcement here: Visions, Star Wars Visions, there are 2 volumes of it on Disney Plus currently, is coming out back with a 3rd volume here. So and it looks like in 2025 they're going to be dropping that probably sometime, I would imagine, after Star Wars Celebration. So look for summer to fall, even maybe winter of 2025 for that. Which also, I always talk about my whiteboard here, but Visions Volume 1 and 2 are almost at the top of that list. So definitely will be a reason to get us on the Visions train as we get into that season. But Visions has been spectacular. I can't wait to see what they do again. It looks like they're going back to all Japanese anime studios, perhaps maybe the better term, to showcase this, which is what they did for Visions Volume 1 here. So more details will probably be announced in the future for this, but it's great to hear this announcement and to see this storytelling continue on in this method. Speaking of Japan, we also got an announcement that in April, in advance of Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo Disneyland, Star Tours The Adventures Continues, kind of the new update to Star Tours that we have here in the United States parks, which includes, it's also in Paris as well. Yep, confirm that. so basically like the scenes that include like the Mandalorian and Ahsoka and Cassian Andor will now be updated to the Star Tours experiences that they have over in Tokyo as well. So for anybody going to Tokyo for Star Wars Celebration in April, and perhaps you are going for also a trip to Tokyo Disneyland, because perhaps it may be the only time you ever get out there. Um, that is your a fun way to get into the Star Wars spirit. Of course, Star Tours is well beloved here at Force Ghost Conversations, and I hope that anybody gets a chance to ride that ride as much as possible. And I think it'll be a fun experience there in Tokyo for y'all to have that as well. And finally, the last bit of news here is, maybe out of our conversation we had last week with Ken Knapsack about the Rise of Skywalker, but it seems that in February 26th, we're finally getting the long-awaited adaptation from Marvel Comics of the Rise of Skywalker. There will be a 5-issue series. The first issue will drop, it looks like, on February 26th. This is written by Jody Hauser with art by Will Sliney, and this comic adaptation, in line with what they've done with other films and just stories of Star Wars, right? They've done like Ahsoka and The Mandalorian in comic adaptation as well. Was canceled due to COVID, and the kind of just reshaping of the world that was happening at that time. And now they are bringing it back, which I think is awesome. So look for that in your local comic shops in February, and be sure to support that so we continue to get adaptations, because there's always just a little bit of different nuance in every type of adaptation, right? Whether it be the film itself, the novelization, perhaps a junior novelization, and the comic adaptation, there's always just a little bit more detail about things that each of the medium presents that you can't really get in any other form. So through that, I hope that everybody goes and supports that, just so that we continue this trend moving forward. And it's a great collaboration between Disney and Marvel. So that, folks, is the Cloud City Gossip, the news of this past week here. And let's just have a little short break here. And then on the other side of that, we will be back with Greg Cass for our conversation on music by John Williams. Stay tuned, folks. Welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, everyone. There is a fantastic new documentary out on Disney Plus called Music by John Williams. And by the title alone, I think you can guess what the documentary is about. It is about composer extraordinaire John Williams, Johnny Williams, as some people call him that know him best. And, I feel like I know him best too right now. So I'm going to call him Johnny at various points during this conversation, just because I feel like Spielberg or Lucas when I say Johnny Williams. I feel like I'm a little bit more in the know. But we're here to discuss this awesome documentary. I think you should all watch it. So full spoiler alert, if you haven't yet, go watch it on Disney Plus and then come right back to this conversation. But we have a guest on this show that, we might have talked about this in a previous episode, that he should definitely watch this. So I've coerced him to watch the documentary, and now he's back on the show to discuss it in full detail and just talk about John Williams, the maestro, the man himself, all the things that they talk about within this documentary. Of course, I'm talking about Greg Cass, who you may know as EyeOnCanon on the internet, as well as from the Long Take Review podcast. Greg, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, and how are you doing today?
I am great, Anthony. So good to be back. And yes, so again, as I confessed last time I was on, your listeners are my best friends, so they already know this. But I was having a rough week, just like a super stressful Monday, and I hadn't yet watched this, despite you giving me like a week and a half warning
Mm-hmm.
that what we're going to record. And so I was very close yesterday afternoon to being like, I think I got to just not, I don't have time to enjoy this. I'm too stressed out. And so I threw this on last night, and my God, did it change my mood entirely. It is such a wonderful, wonderful documentary. And I was so glad in my kind of haze of grumpiness and stress that I didn't like give in and
Mhm.
quit on this.
Mhm.
So I stand in your debt that you both coerced me to watch this quicker than I might have gotten to it, but I also am just so grateful because it really changed my mood and put me in a good place. So I am really excited to talk about it. It kind of unlocked things that I've known about John Williams, but had maybe forgotten or
Mhm.
thought
Mhm.
about in a long time. So yeah, thanks, thank you.
Well, you're welcome, first and foremost, and happy to always give people a push and a nudge in a direction that I think they're going to really enjoy. So I'm glad that you were able to find some time, and I'm glad that it like had a before and after effect for you. I think that this documentary really has that wonderful effect of finding that magical charm and whimsical nature that I think Williams brings to a lot of his scores. We're frankly living in a great time of great film documentaries recently. I don't know if you had a chance to check out Super Slash Man, the Christopher Reeve documentary that came out, at
Well, I've
least in,
heard it's
in
very good.
cinemas a few weeks ago. Yeah, I actually got to check it
Yeah.
out in the theaters, and it's fantastic too. So hopefully one day I'll get to nudge you to watch that when it's on Max or something like that. Definitely hoping for great. I know you. Check out everything when it comes to Academy Awards season.
Yeah,
So
how did I miss that one?
hopefully these knock out a few on your list so that when February comes around, you're not scrambling to pick pick up so many things.
Well, it's so funny because yes, I watch every film nominated for an award. I've done it 3 years in a row now,
Oh
and,
man.
when you get to the
Yeah,
documentaries
all the
and the
power to you in finding those
foreign.
docs.
Yeah, they're both hard to find, and then they are often just, like, soul crushing because
Mhm.
it's like,
Mm, yeah.
"Let's look at a children's ward in a Syrian city destroyed by war," and you're like, "Oh god, this is important and I should know," but it's terrible. So, I don't know that this one is eligible, but, there are actually a lot of hopeful documentaries out there. So, Superman will be eligible, and
Mhm.
and the eligibility has to do with being in theaters
Well,
usually, right?
it did have a theater release,
Yeah, so it
so
should be good.
I think Amblin knew
Yeah.
what they were doing. Yep.
Okay.
Spiel
Oh, this one did. Okay, it did sneak
Yes,
in.
yep.
Nice.
Yep.
Oh, you're right. I guess I did see that. Yeah, which would be fantastic. And then there's one on Netflix right now called Will and Harper, starring Will Ferrell, which is
Mm.
also like a very hopeful, like happy. There's some serious sides to it, but it's about Will Ferrell and his best friend, who's a transgender woman, kind of
Mhm.
just getting to know each other post
Mm.
transition and seeing how their
Mm.
relationship has changed. And so I'm like hoping that I'm knocking out a bunch of these. So we'll see. And then it'll just leave me the foreign films, which I usually have to pirate somewhere because they're not ever really released
It's so
here
hard to find, I
full.
know.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I was trying to follow in your footsteps last year, without you even knowing it. So this is the first time actually telling you this. But I once I got to those, yeah, foreign films and some of these docs, I watched all the trailers. And there was that one, like 4 women that were in the same family. I can't remember exactly
Yeah.
the title. That's all I can remember. But I was like, I tried looking it up everywhere, and like this seems really interesting. Of course, it was so interesting that I forgot about it. Yeah, I was like, oh my god, I don't know how Greg does it. He must be spending a lot of money for these random streaming services, or just one-off rentals, or
Yeah.
getting
As
some
as a
VPN for a foreign website.
It's funny because I try to do all those things and I'm not tech savvy enough. So, like, there are message boards on the internet. It's like, yeah, change your VPN, get into the free Canadian media streaming
Hmm.
service,
Hmm.
and you're all set. And I try, and I'm like, I think I just got scammed and gave away my credit card number 4 times or something. So,
What
but we
really
get
needs
there.
we really need to get you to become a member of the academy somehow. Let's start the whatever the process needs to become an
Mm,
actual member, so that you just get the screeners sent to you on the DVDs that like
yeah.
delete itself after one viewing or two viewings, however they work themselves. I think that'll just make your life a whole lot easier if somehow we can just get that to be a thing.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think you're right that that is the easier path. However, I would have to like create a film to get
Is
nominated for an
that how it
Oscar to
works
do
these
it.
days? I don't know. The academy's so big.
It's true. It's true. There's lots of room.
There's gotta be some. I mean, not every person that is a member of the academy has to have made a film. They gotta let the press in somehow.
That's
And as I think with your work with Long Take Review, and as an academic,
true.
I think
Yeah.
you should more than qualify.
All right, I'll
Anywho,
campaign.
anywho, all campaigns aside, we're here to talk about Johnny Williams, Johnny Dubs, the man, the myth, the legend, the maestro. And frankly, Greg, I want to start with your introduction to John Williams. I want to talk about what was the first movie that you ever saw that he completed the score for. How'd you become aware of this man and his work? And before we even started this conversation today, we talked off air a little bit about how you have a CD that you were trying to hunt down in your archive, your personal archive, that kind of ties into Johnny Williams, and I was gonna try and guess it. So I'm gonna throw out, give me three guesses here, and we'll
All
see
right.
if any of them hit the mark for what is. Was it your first CD that you ever purchased?
So I think so this is a little bit of my answer. So I think, and this is going to show my age, but
Okay.
when CD players were introduced, my
Mhm.
family went to Circuit City, now
Love it.
defunct, but you
Oh
can
my
still see
gosh,
their
what a day!
buildings everywhere.
Yep.
uh,
The
and we
facade
bought,
exists still, right beside
yeah,
Sports Authority.
and it says Spirit Halloween half the year
Oh
now,
my
but it's
gosh, yeah,
still a Circuit City. We went there and we got like the big cabinet CD stereo with the big
love it.
speakers, and that was like our family Christmas present this year. And
Mhm.
while my dad was, I'm sure, signing, the layaway terms or something, my mom said that we could each pick out a CD, and it's just my sister and I in the family. I picked out the Aladdin soundtrack because I had it on cassette and I'd never gotten to the end of it because
Okay,
you couldn't just get there in the cassette. So,
not as easy.
uh, no, not as easy. So I wanted the CD version. And then my sister picked out who knows what, probably something cool because she's older than me. So she had
Mhm.
real taste by then. And my mom picked out a CD, a classical music CD that was a John Williams CD. So I'll let you guess it from those clues.
A classical music CD.
I mean,
Classical.
it's just John Williams music.
Classical. You're blowing my mind here as
No, no,
about
no, no. Don't be off the hunt. It's his movie music.
it's a movie. Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
but
I
it's
was
still,
like, wow.
went to the classical section and found the movie music
Okay, okay.
because she
Now it
loved
makes
John
all
Williams.
sense here
There you
because
go.
I'm like, wow, did you just unearth like his like random recordings that they showed in this documentary of like his own symphonies that he had done? I'm like, I'm never gonna guess this at all. I thought I actually had this in the bag. Okay. Let's start with Jurassic Park, just based off of the time frame of everything.
You're close, but I did look up that this CD came out in 1990, so I think you're just a little too late with
Is it
Jurassic
Hook?
Park. It's not Hook.
Oh, not Hook. Home Alone.
No, I
Oh
don't
my
even think
gosh,
we
I'm
ever
0 for
owned Home Alone.
3. Okay,
Uh,
well, I struck out. Well, what is it?
So it's a really cool CD, and I did look it up to make sure I didn't dream it. It's called the John Williams Spielberg, or the Spielberg slash Williams collaboration.
Oh, this is
And
awesome.
so it's a Sony Music Classics release, and it is just a set of John Williams conducting the Boston Pops, which
Uh-huh.
I didn't live there near them then, but I do now. And it is a big collection of the Spielberg Williams catalog up until 1990. So
Mm,
it's all the kind of 80s collaborations
yeah,
from the early part of this documentary. And what was really interesting about it for me is I didn't know barely any of these songs. My mom would play this CD, and I eventually took ownership of it.
right.
And eventually, I had a CD player in my own room, some kind of sweet boom box. I want
Nice.
everybody to picture, and I would fall asleep every night to this CD playing.
Love it.
And it the you know so the answer to your question is the first track on the CD is the Raiders March, and I suspect that's why my mom bought the CD because we had all the Indiana Jones movies on VHS long before Star Wars ever entered my house. So I
Mhm.
know I'm a Star Wars guy most of the time, but Indiana Jones is what my parents liked. And so
Mm,
I think she liked the music from that.
okay.
Just to hit up people with some of what this CD entails, it's the Raiders March, the theme from Always, the Adventures on Earth, the theme from
Mhm.
E.T., the Sugarland Express, Jaws, a second track from Jaws, Empire of the Sun, Temple of Doom, another E.T. track, 1941. So I think if I could keep going, but you can see it's kind of like hit, deep cut, hit, deep
Yep,
cut,
yep.
hit, deep cut. And listening to that kind of every night just embedded the music in my mind. And there are many of those films I actually have never seen Always to this day. I saw Sugarland Express within the last, like, 2 months, right? Because
Mm,
these are some of his early Spielberg's early
yeah.
films, and I didn't see it. So, I would say that CD is the moment I became aware of who John Williams was, and then by the time I became a Star Wars fan, probably, 3 or 4 years later, it was like, "Oh, yeah, that guy." Like, yeah, he's the guy who does really cool music. So,
Right, right.
that's how I got there. But, there are well, 1941 is another kind of Spielberg miss in his catalog, but it's got
Some
this,
might
like,
say.
some might say, it's got a nice little romp of a theme, and
Yeah.
it's like this really cool patriotic march, and I remember just laying in bed hearing that as I fell asleep and being like, "Wow, what's this song?" Like,
Mm,
marching band should play this. Like,
they
this is
should.
awesome. So yeah, I would say, I really loved those songs, even like having not seen the movies. And there are moments in the documentary that they mention this. Some of the directors they interview say, like, I think it's J.J. Abrams says, like, he has this ability where you hear a song for the first time and you think, like, of course it's always existed. It's
Mhm.
such a perfect song.
Yeah.
And, I certainly didn't have sophisticated thoughts like that when I was, in third, fourth, fifth grade. But I definitely, like, felt like this music spoke to me even without knowing its source material. So, but I got to throw the question back to you. I know you are obviously a little younger than me, so I don't know if you got a CD player at Circuit City, but how did you encounter, John Williams for the first time? Do you know which movie it was?
Sure. Before we get into that, though, I have some follow-up questions about
Oh,
your
okay.
experience there. And first off, how in the world did you even fall asleep to this CD? Because I can only imagine, like, as soon as the Raiders March plays, like, my heart would be pumping again, and I'm ready to go. Like, it is the adverse effect of actually falling
Hmm.
asleep here. Do you know what track that you were like, I can't remember beyond this most nights?
It's probably Sugarland Express is a very slow harmonica theme. It's
Mhm.
beautiful, and they talk about it in the
Yeah.
documentary how it makes the movie, but it's very kinda slow and mellow. So I bet that's where I'd start to fade
Mhm.
out,
Mhm.
but, Raiders is probably on while I'm still getting the jammies on and turning
Oh,
off the
okay.
light and then climbing in.
Sure, sure. Wow. Okay. It's funny because jumping over to me now, we actually have had a similar approach for a while of falling asleep to these particular tracks, but not these particular tracks, but just like the idea of movie soundtracks being like the impetus for like sleep creation, or however you want to, falling into the first level of Inception. But for me, circa 2008, 9, even jumping up technology wise and moving up to like an MP3 player, an iPod at this point, an iPod Touch, I had would listen to the scores of Kyle Eastwood, Clint Eastwood's son, who has done a
Mm,
lot of the score work for his Clint Eastwood's movies ever since like Million Dollar Baby, I think.
mhm.
Yeah, Letters from Iwo Jima, oddly enough, is the soundtrack of my sleep for the most part. And nowadays I've switched it to listening to West Coast baseball to fall asleep. So thank you for West Coast for existing at 10 o'clock Eastern time, so that I can
Mhm.
fall asleep to that. But yeah, that was also, I had a similar story on that front there.
Nice.
But also similar to you, it seems like the egg came before the chicken in a way. Like you'd heard the music of John Williams before watching the movies or at least putting a face to a name, right? That kind of sense, which is similar to I think my experience as well here. I think I took John Williams for granted in many ways, especially because I kind of just like loved Star Wars. That was the really the main way that I knew who this guy was like, oh, he did the music for Star Wars. I love the 2004 documentary Empire of Dreams that comes on
Mm.
the 2004 special edition DVD release. And then I was like, oh, that's the guy that does the music in this. That's cool. But I didn't know anything else that he had really done. We had talked not necessarily last episode, but on the Breakfast Pack last week, in talking about Skeleton Crew, that I also had a childhood that wasn't allowed to watch many films.
Mm.
Of this era, the John Williams classical era, let's call it that. But I was able to watch many of his rated R films of the 90s. That was made no sense. That's a
Yeah.
whole other topic for a different day as to why I was able to watch Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List and
Mm.
Munich and AI and Catch Me If You Can, um, instead of like E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It makes no sense. Wi- the- I'll talk to my mother over Thanksgiving about this. um, so like I knew, and then like with the internet I was able to be like, okay, this guy did this, then this, and then this. Oh, those are great. So actually like had a backwards effect where it's like
Mm.
I knew his like recent work of the time frame that is like the 1999 through like 2006. That's really where I'm like coming into my own as a film student, in a way, a person that appreciates the film and the finer art of film and cinema. And then as an adult being able to go back and then rediscover a lot of these films and these scores. So really, that's the first time I saw the face was in the 2004 documentary Empire of Dreams, and
Mm.
then in 2005 I was in marching band, not a marching band, but we did a concert band that did a medley of Revenge of the Sith tunes
Oh,
in
wow.
celebration of the film's release. So we in that band concert performance, it was like the coolest thing ever as a kid to be like, all right, I'm playing snare drum on these tracks that are in Revenge of the Sith. So that's where I came into my Johnny Williams experience. And then of course afterwards you're just like, wow, he did that too, he did that too, and the man's still working at the age of 93 and hopefully never either passes away or retires. I don't want either to happen. I think this guy's still rocking it out, and frankly his last two works that he's done, The Fablemans and Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny, are some of his best work, I might argue. So like, why stop?
Yeah, well, you're unlocking for me too. So I'm also a band kid. So I played trumpet, and at my high school, I don't know why, but every year for graduation, we obviously learned pomp and circumstance to
Sure.
march in the seniors. But the recessional out was always the Yavin throne room, and
What?
so like I'd
What?
seen Star Wars by then, and it's awesome, right? Because like everybody's graduated, they stand up and move their tassels, and then we just get to belt out dun, 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 and it was awesome. And we even had like a little arrangement. It was kind of janky where we would, if the class hadn't finished filing out, we would loop back and just kind of find a repetition point and go around a few times. So I remember that a lot. I don't think we ever got to play Raiders March, but we did do. It features prominently in the film again. We had a girl in our school who was a kind of gifted violinist, so we did the
Mm-hmm.
Schindler's
Mm-hmm.
List theme
Mm.
in the concert band one year, which I don't remember being particularly exciting for anybody except the violin, but it
Yeah.
is really a beautiful song, and
Yeah.
got everybody involved in it. And again, I don't think I had seen Schindler's List. I hadn't really known. I knew what it was, and I knew it was kind of culturally important, but to see the crowd kind of get into that song, it kind of makes a lot more sense hearing the full story about it. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I gotta tell you, I'm upset. I should have went to your high school. How did this happen? This is a travesty. I need to have a talk to my mother. How dare we live in Pennsylvania? I was
Ugh.
robbed. I was
Yeah.
robbed of a wonderful graduation experience. Instead, I just got pomp and circumstance like everybody else. That's ridiculous.
Well, and I know you're also a fan of the Blast Point guys. They have the kind of rock and roll version for
Yeah,
their theme song, and so when that comes on, I kind of, especially if you're on the treadmill listening to Blast Points, and all of a sudden that music hits, it's like yes, like I'm
I know.
strutting my
We're
stuff.
rocking and rolling. Yeah. I love when they
No, it's a
get
great arrangement.
I think when they have indie talk too. I think it's like a little like jazz version of the Raiders march
Yeah,
too. I could be
yeah, they're
wrong,
fun.
but it's been a while since they've done indie stuff. But yeah, they also do a variation of that too. And yeah, yeah, great stuff. John Williams all around. This man is awesome. But now that we've got a foundation for our John Williams experience here, I want to talk about the documentary a little bit here. And
Mm.
frankly, prior to watching it, how much did you actually know about John Williams himself, like his personal life? And was there anything about his story itself that surprised you while you were watching this?
Um, Whoops, I think yes. So let's see. I would say this is the area of the documentary that I didn't realize I didn't know anything about, right? Like, as it started playing, I think what the totality of his personal life I knew was that, it was well known that his son recorded Loptinek,
Yes.
and I remember knowing that that son was in Toto, the band.
Yep.
Now, I think notably that son is not in the documentary. We have one
Yeah, the
daughter
Suns
kind of,
are, yeah.
yeah, one daughter representing the children here and kind of telling the whole personal side of the story as much as she's comfortable with. But it was kind of as it started going and he's talking about his child life and growing up. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know any of this. And then he talks about his first wife and the
Mhm.
sudden tragic loss of her. And I was shocked that I'm like, I'm somebody raising young kids. I'm like, I can't imagine
I
kind of
know.
out of the blue. I think she was 41 when she just had
Yep.
a brain aneurysm, which I didn't think of this till this moment, but that's actually the exact same age my wife is right now. So it's
You're
like,
like, "You
you
okay?"
can't, how do you, yeah. So it's kind of shocking to me how little I knew about that, and I do think I imagine that's been a bit deliberate. That he
Mhm.
seems to be a man who lets the work speak for him in some ways, and he's so ubiquitous in our culture that it's kind of like I felt like he's like my grandpa, but then I'm like, oh, I don't know
Mhm.
grandpa. Like
Mhm.
grandpa was married before, and then the other piece that I thought was really interesting. So again, moved to Boston when I went to college here. I grew up in New Hampshire, so it's not like I was that far away.
Mhm.
And so I grew up kind of in the Boston media market, and I knew that John Williams had conducted the Pops. And we have some kind of things around town that remember his time conducting the Pops, plaques and statues and stuff.
Right.
But I had no idea that in the middle of that run, he actually resigned because the Pops refused to play movie music or were really upset about
Yeah.
it. I guess we're spoiling the documentary, but you
Oh,
had
hey,
fair
I
warning.
warned everybody. Yeah, get into it.
Yeah. So it was like, wow, that must have been a major controversy. This
Mhm.
moment where the way the documentary presents is that the kind of stuffy classical musicians are like, this is beneath us. We should be playing real music, not movie music. And John
Yeah.
Williams just up and resigned in protest. It was then reconciled and he continued on. But that was another big shocker to me just because I thought I'd never heard that in the context of him playing here and him conducting here. I can't recall if he came this year, but he has come most years that I've lived
Mhm.
in the city, probably with the exception of COVID. I don't know how much he's traveling anymore, but I have had the great fortune of seeing him one time here in town
Mhm.
conduct a whole night at Symphony Hall with the Pops Orchestra. It was a collection of Star Wars music. I think it was like 3 years
Mm.
ago,
Good
and
stuff.
it was oh, actually no, it was longer. It was 5 years ago because it was in the lead up to Rise of Skywalker. Because he
Mm.
talked about how in the loose moments between songs, he spoke on the mic about how he really wasn't sure he had one more in him, but then and he expresses a similar idea in the documentary. He says, I saw Daisy Ridley and I loved her so much. I just couldn't imagine letting anybody else finish
Yeah.
out her story. And
Yeah.
I think that was his introduction to Ray's theme because he was really quite smitten with Daisy, which I think is
Mhm.
just adorable. I mean, we could question it, but he's
We're not.
grandpa.
We're
Grandpa can
not.
have a little crush. Yeah, that's fine. Um, so yeah, so I'm rambling a bit, but it was shocking to me how little I knew about it. And while I don't think this is a deeply revelatory documentary, I do think it was pretty generous with what he shared and the kind of
Yeah.
stories he told, and some of the access they got seemed really special. And I'll throw it to you with like, do you feel like he told kind of his whole story, or was he holding back? How did you kind of interpret
Yeah,
his?
I feel like we got the whole story from his point of view. I would have actually been more interested to hear about like the daughter because she just kind of like threw in every now and then to be like, yeah, I guess I had to take care of the mom role for a
Mhm.
while there, which it kind of implies that after his wife's passing, that he really went to work. Like that's how, and he noted, he said, that's how I feel connected to her. It's like I feel her sitting beside me when I'm at the piano writing and making new music. So I feel like he might have been at the Fox studio lot more often than
he was perhaps leading on and then leaving his oldest daughter to raise the other two boys at the same time. Like I wonder how much of an active and engaged father he really was after his first wife's passing there, and it's kind of
Mm,
a story left out there. And of course, even the two sons are not, as we noted, and definitely caught this I went through it, that they're not even featured. And you get one grandkid, and I
yeah.
assume that's from the line of the daughter too, considering his last name there. So like, I was like, oh, maybe there's some more inner workings of the Williams family dynamic, and right, it's presenting that John is this really awesome and cool guy, but then like perhaps if you ask like the kids more specifically how they feel, like, yeah, dad was great and he did do a lot of cool stuff, but like, he's dad at the same time. We had our rough moments, and it wasn't easy growing up, especially when mom died and he wasn't really there to help emotionally support us through that grief and that challenge that it presented. Maybe that's all there, and we'll never know because they're not there presenting that. But it certainly leaves that lingering question that I think is on the table. It's also crazy that, like, again, like you said, like that was he was 40. It seemed like she was in her 40s too when she just died suddenly. But he really, his career only starts after she dies, which is the
Yeah.
wild thing. Is like, for any of us, like at home, like, just because you're 40 doesn't mean you can't have your whole life career afterwards. Like 50 years, 50 plus 60 years now at this point, of just knocking out wonderful score after score after score, which is wild. Like he had this full career beforehand where he's doing like jazz work and doing session work and score work, for various film, TV, and a little bit of movies here and there. But his heart's not into it. And then it seems like she passes, and then he meets Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
and then
And almost
because
gets remarried right there to Steven
yeah,
Spielberg.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
like that's his like his wife is saying like, all right, it's okay, go. This is
Yeah.
your next calling is this, in a way. So it's like, wow, the two lives of John Williams. It's like there's a before life and then an afterlife, and she's the, uh,
Mm,
her untimely passing is like the definite like marker that separates the two. I knew about her passing and how much that influenced him. I do want to plug the wonderful podcast, the Soundtrack Show. It's done
mm,
by David W. Collins from Lucasfilm, where he does really in-depth analytical work on many scores that Williams has done over the years. He usually does like 3 to 4 episodes per a specific topic or movie, going really nitty gritty into it. If you're a music nerd like I am, he'll really explain the theory behind things, but also explain the context of like where it fits in the movie and all of that, as well. So everyone go check that out. It's available on anywhere you can get your podcast. And he does a full episode, basically a biography on John Williams, as well as pretty much every major John Williams score that you can think of. He's covered it to this point. So definitely highlight that for folks. But yeah, the Boston Pops thing was really an interesting thing too, because it's weird to imagine a world where people were like, film score is beneath us. I do. I've come across the academic world where sometimes they
yeah.
can boo-hoo things that are quote unquote popular. I got my degree in history, and that was a lot of the debate was academic history versus museum history.
Mm,
Museums are for the people, and that's not studious history. That's not us going into archives and reading books and looking at primary sources. They're distilling these massive 1,000 page works on these biographical, these people that have done great things in society, and then they're distilling it to like 3 sentences for the world to consume. And it's this people on their family vacation, and
mm.
they're running through the exhibit just because they want to check it off the list before they go to lunch. So that I'm not surprised that this debate happened, but it's just wild to think that at some point someone was against John Williams, and I bet they're really kicking themselves now, looking back on
Well,
that time.
yeah, well, and that's the exact thought I had because I do kind of vaguely understand that moment exactly in the terms you said it, which is that it was not, the classical composers, and Pop's
Yeah,
orchestras had a kind of canon of composers they worked through, and the idea that like them playing ET, they would have turned up their nose at it is crazy. especially because if you look at the last, I would say 5 years, that's the only thing keeping the doors open at
It's
Symphony
exactly right.
Hall,
Yep.
right? Like it used to be that, the symphony kind of really supported the pops as like a little fun extra thing. And now it's the pops orchestras that are supporting the symphonies and keeping the
Hmm.
classical music in
Yeah.
circulation. Oh, and just pulling up Instagram this afternoon, I have an ad to go right over to the Symphony Hall and see the Boston Pops play along with Home Alone. So John
See?
Williams music and playing along with films, which you have to imagine would make those old stuffy musicians
Oh,
just
their
so
blood's
angry to
boiling right
know.
now.
But I mean, I know they're happening all over the country, I think, in a
Oh
beautiful
yeah.
way, for these orchestras. But like here in town, like I think in the last 5 years they've done the three original trilogy. They've
Hmm.
definitely done Jaws. Home Alone is being advertised right now. It's like this is what's keeping the lights on at
It's
Symphony
the way of the
Hall. This is
future. That's
keeping them
right.
employed. So, I think it does speak to the fact, not that they really made it out to be like winners and losers, but John Williams won in the long run. Like
Sure
he
did.
changed classical music, and just like you said about museum history, it's like it's about democratizing it. It's about welcoming people into these spaces, and I know plenty of people who only like listening to classic composers because they
Hmm.
fell in love with John Williams or Howard Shore or whom I'm forgetting, the Back to the Future guy. That's the other
Oh,
one in the trilogy.
Silvestri.
Silvestri, Alan Silvestri.
Yep.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, so those ones are all high on the list for so many people, I think our age. So, yeah.
That's right. They're a gateway to
Yeah.
the other forms of classical music, right? You gotta do your pops music of Williams night, and then you can have your Vivaldi and your Bach night the following week, right? You gotta keep
Yeah.
the lights on. You gotta keep the lights on somehow. You gotta sell subscriptions to the season, the pop
Yep.
season, and sometimes that'll include a Disney sing along, and then the next week you'll have this big concerto. And it's not like Williams didn't do that too at the same time. He wasn't just scoring for film. And I liked that there was that, I forget his name, but he had like that mentor that was like, film, Johnny, you gotta, you gotta be writing symphonies here. Come on now.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
film is beneath you, man. This is not your jam. And then whatever voice that was within him, Steven Spielberg probably being like, I need you for this. And they're geeking out
Mhm.
over wonderful film scores over the years. I think really was a pivotal moment, and not just in the relationship and life of John Williams. I think for film all over, like we're a different country because of the relationship between these two people. We'll get into that in a little bit here, so
Yeah.
put a pin on that one. But like we kind of touch the surface of a little bit here. But this documentary, one of my favorite things is that it highlights some of the lesser known things that John Williams has done. Perhaps that 40 years before he got to the starting up with Fiddler on the Roof and Sugarland Express and all that. So he's done work with television music. He has his personal concertos, particularly that one he did for his wife that passed, which I think was really beautiful. They shared in the documentary. His session playing, which also blew my mind that he was just a piano player on a lot of different movies that are very famous, and his jazz material. So, like, I throw it to you, Greg. Now, which of these pieces, perhaps featured in the documentary or not, were big standouts for you?
It was really interesting to hear those early years because, yeah, I mean, as my story noted, it's like Spielberg seems like the start of Williams to me
Yeah.
in so many ways. So I completely agree. And, they flashed a lot of those posters up along the way of like, he's piano player on these. And then you're like, whoa, like those are really big films. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
now as the documentary reveals, the Sony studio name is music building
Yeah.
is named after Williams, which he was very charming, saying like, "I said when I walked in here as a kid that it would be named after me
I
someday, and
own
I'm
this
correct."
building.
Yeah. I already knew this, but it was really charming to be reminded that he did Gilligan's Island, and
Yeah.
it's so funny. I don't believe he did the theme song, which sometimes gets spread around. I
Mm-mm, I
think
don't think
that
so.
is credited to some other artist, but that he scored it. And Gilligan's Island is not something I ever watched, but it was always on Nick at Night kind of when I was a kid,
Yeah.
and I would stumble across it from time to time. And so they play a short little clip, and it's silly and it's lighthearted, but you're like, "Oh, I can actually sense that that's kind of John Williams's sensibilities
Mm.
there." So that was
Mhm.
a fun reminder that Gilligan's Island is among his many creations.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, one of many. Like this guy
Yeah.
was doing so many things. You got to pay the bills, right? Just
Yeah.
like we were saying, the pops people, you got to you got to do your Williams night in order to keep funding stuff. But you also, as a working musician, you got to take the gigs that come, right? You got
Mm,
bills to pay, and you got a family of seemingly five to feed. So you got to take your session work. You got to take the
yeah.
whatever comes and I was so surprised that this guy's playing piano on West Side Story. Like, wow, what a just throw that one in there. I mean, you could really just end your career after that big one. So it's kind of
Yeah.
funny, like in a way. We'll talk about this in a little bit here, but there's only four films that Williams hasn't scored for Spielberg in their relationship over the years, and
Mm.
one of them being West Side Story, which ironically, thereby he kind of ipso facto played on.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
assuming it's a 1-to-1 musical thing from the 1961, 62, 63, somewhere in there, film score for that adaptation that Leonard Bernstein did back
Mm.
in the day. So wow, just a wild thing. Like I always find it so fascinating to hear like who are session musicians on things, and you're and like, oh, they're actually on this, and just add it to their repertoire of cool things that they've done in their lifetime. Another one that isn't related to John Williams at all, but the guitarist for Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, one of the premier guitar players in the history of all time, is actually the guitar player, a session player on Goldfinger, the song from
Yeah.
of course, the classic 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger. Again, just like, wow, they're there. How is all this happening at
Well,
once?
and my favorite Star Wars related one of those is that Bon Jovi, his debut album, the first album John Bon Jovi sings on, is Christmas in the Stars,
Yep,
which is ridiculous.
it is wild. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I put on every year to make my kids laugh, and my wife rolls her eyes so hard. Although she will now hum along to "What do you get a Wookiee for Christmas?" Like, it it gets under your
It's
skin.
growing on her. Yeah. Every year she's like, all right, get the Christmas with the stars out. Come on. And then
The funny one is she was a math major in school, and so the song that's C-3PO giving the odds against Christmas being Christmas, which I think is the Bon Jovi one. Mathematically, it doesn't work at all, right? It's like infuriatingly bad mathematics
Mhm.
on it, but it's still a fun one to bust out. Hey, we're headed into holiday season, so people should
That's
get out
right.
Christmas in the Stars this
That's
year.
right. It's go find it's very expensive to find it on vinyl and on cassette
Mm,
tape on on the eBays. So I always find that to be quite a wonderful thing if you're able to find it at an affordable rate. So I have like an
mm,
eBay alert on it. So I'm always like,
nice.
will I find it at a good rate? Perhaps. Will this be the year? I don't know. But I also have a running tab on like John Williams for like vinyl and cassette
Mm,
tapes, and that's how I knew that he had such a jazz career. Because I'm like, how is this
sure.
the same Johnny Williams? And Lucas was even had that same thing. He's like, is that the jazz guy?
I
And
loved that was Lucas, like, "You want me to hire the jazz
you want me to
guy?"
hire the
Like,
jazz guy?
totally
Like, I know
confused
I just
that
did American Graffiti, but like that ain't what I need for this. And of
yeah,
course,
that was
that
too
being
funny.
like the perhaps the most iconic things of Star Wars being like the cantina scene
Mm,
of that, and him being able to infuse that jazz love that he has into this. I would argue that like Laptinek has a bit of jazz funk to it.
yeah.
Um, to infuse that, and as the documentary showcased, Catch Me If You Can has a lot of jazz elements to it. So he's able to sprinkle that in there, and Seth MacFarlane just kind of being in this documentary here and there, just to throw in some wonderful wisdom. I always forget like this man is a student of Star Wars in many ways,
Mm,
I'm always reminded of a interview that he did with Lucas back in like I think 2006, 7, something in that range, probably the time of Revenge of the Sith, where he's like, all right, I'm going to quiz you on like music in Star Wars. Can you tell me where this scene is at? And he'll be like, bum, 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 bum. And George is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't care. And he's like, wrong. It's the Empire Strikes Back. It's the Hoth face sequence. um, so it's just funny. Like it always reminds me of that whenever I see Seth MacFarlane, especially in this documentary too. The other things that I will say are just you always are like, oh, John Williams did that too. Again, that's one of the many
Mm,
things that I say often in my lifetime is, holy cow, John Williams did that too. The Olympics themes. So we just had the
yep.
Olympics in Paris this past year. Every time it cuts to commercial, you hear John Williams.
Bum,
Um,
bum, ba bum,
yep.
bum, bum. Yep.
Or and then there's the other one, the like the beast. It's the Summon the Heroes one too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I'm like that, and the Sunday Night Football theme for NBC always gets me. And he recently did the college football playoff theme too
Mm,
for
mm.
ABC and Disney, ESPN. So this man, he has legacy everywhere.
Yep. And NBC Nightly News, right? So
NBC
every
Nightly
night
News.
at
That's right.
6:30, it's
Oh,
playing somewhere, right? Absolutely. So,
how could you?
um,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I did enjoy the anecdote because I saw Catch Me If You Can many times when it came out, but I haven't watched it in probably at least a decade,
Oh,
and I'd
time for a
forgotten
rewatch.
that opening credit sequence is so iconic, and the jazz score with the kind of Art Deco-y cutout animation. I was like, "Oh, this is so wonderful!" And the jazz saxophonist who was like,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
called up his office and said, "You got to put out a concert concerto of this," and they were like, "Yeah, it's in the works. Don't worry about it, buddy." And sure enough, they played there. So I do think it, in the very last part of the documentary, they show how many concert pieces he's created
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
artists or different
Just this big wall
orchestras.
of books.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's really incredible to think about the volume of music and probably how often it's getting performed everywhere. We were mentioning our high school experiences on through to the
Hmm.
top tier
Hmm.
professionals. It's incredible.
Yeah, the legacy this man has, even just without film, is astounding. But it took, him doing all these wonderful films to give him the credibility and the credence in order to like say like, oh yeah, give him the nightly news theme, give him the Olympics theme. We need a theme for this. Who can we go to? John Williams. And I think a lot of that comes from the relationship that he has with Spielberg. I don't think it's hyperbole that the world has changed because these two people have met. I think that is a very factual statement that you can make and argue for. So, like I said earlier, currently John Williams has scored every film that Spielberg has done except for four. One being West Side Story, which kind of, take it if you will. He did. We talked about that one a little bit. He didn't do The Color Purple. Makes
Mm.
sense. Quincy Jones did that score. Rest in peace. He recently passed away. Um, he also didn't do Bridge of Spies and Ready Player One, which, from what I hear, makes sense because he was doing other work at the same time. Spielberg is a man that have a whole talk about Spielberg and his work habits one day, but he is a man that doesn't sleep. I don't think he's constantly working on 1,000 projects, or whether he's behind the director's chair or if he's executive producing or producing something, he's always on a film studio or set, or thinking about, or taking a meeting, having a lunch, doing something in the art of film industry. So this relationship has been incredible and lengthy over almost over 5 decades now, frankly, for spanning from Sugarland Express in '74 all the way
Mm.
up to the Fablemans in 2023. So Greg, how has the relationship between Spielberg and Williams changed the landscape of cinema in your opinion?
Just a simple question. We're back to the Acolyte episode territory, but it's such a wonderful question, and where I'll bridge it from the documentary. What was so clear in the documentary is that they deeply love each other,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd heard many times that John Williams talks like a kind of jazz cat, and you don't see it in interviews a lot. But there's a moment where Spielberg walks in and he says, "Hi, baby, how you doing?" And I'm like, "There it is! Like, there's the jazz cat version of him." So, it was really quite wonderful to get to hear it a little bit and to see the love between those two. I also loved when they talk a lot about developing Jaws as kind of the starting point of their relationship. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a moment just after that where they talk about Close Encounters, and
Yeah.
Spielberg says our relationship went from two notes, dun to 5 notes, right? Da-na-na-na-na. And it was just so sweet. And it's clearly something he trots out at cocktail parties all the time, but it totally works, and it was charming as a part of that. So I recently figured out that Steven Spielberg, according to my Letterboxd stats, is the director I've seen the most movies from, which makes sense in a lot of ways. So I've been working really hard to fill in the ones I haven't seen, which is
Mhm.
why I alluded to I saw Sugarland Express in
Yeah,
1941 this year. I've filled in a few. I just heard you say you've seen Munich. Munich's one of the ones I missed, and it's not on
really.
streaming.
It's
So
not. It's hard to find.
yeah, I got to find Munich and The Post are the two really recent ones that I haven't
Oh,
seen.
you
So
missed The Post?
yeah,
Oh, Greg.
by no slight, just unintentionally, but so and then Always, which was mentioned in the Spielberg Williams collaboration CD, I haven't seen still.
Mhm.
So I got to catch up on a few more to fill out my Spielberg, but it's remarkable how we take them for granted now.
Yeah.
And I thought this when Fableman's kind of made its Oscar run. Everybody's like, yeah, it's good or whatever, but it's Spielberg being good. Like, who cares? And
Oh, yeah, I
West Side
hated that
Story.
criticism. Same
Oh
thing with
yeah,
West Side Story
absolutely.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, at West Side Story, I felt that, like, why do we need a new version of this? And then I went to the theater to see it, and I was like, oh my god, this is incredible. Like 5
Yeah.
minutes in, I'm like, how has he not had a career of shooting musicals?
Mhm.
Because he moved the camera in such innovative
It was
ways and
beautiful.
just a master of it. So there I go talking about one of the ones John Williams didn't do, but
But he kinda
um
did. If de
yeah, yeah,
facto.
right. In the circular sense. I would have guessed Ready Player One, and I would have actually gone with something like Minority Report, maybe, as
Nope.
opposed to
Yeah.
like Bridge of Spies. So that surprises me because Bridge of Spies is so traditional. It must have just been scheduling, like you noted.
It certainly was,
Um,
yeah, because that same year, Force Awakens comes out, and he also
uh,
scores the other William Spielberg film that came out that year, which was the BFG, the often forgotten one.
I just watched that one
See?
because it
There
was
you
one of
go.
the ones I missed. My kids loved it. They
It's a great
they were
movie, great
reluctant to
story,
try
and they
it,
yeah.
but they had a great time with it. Well, and so I think it's going to take losing them for this culture to finally be
Mm.
like, wow,
Oh, man, that
we
was
really had some masters amongst us, some gods among men. I think, you don't have American cinema without um Spielberg. And I understand, like, he's denigrated by some for his blockbuster work, but the fact that he has those two levels to him, that he can put together Jurassic Park in months of Schindler's List is
wild.
mind blowing and incredible. And actually, something like the BFG shows you that that he sometimes falls so in love with the technology that he gets a little lost in the story at times. Or
Mhm.
Ready Player One is also, I think, an example of that, although I
Oh,
liked both
love
of
it.
those movies.
They rock.
But yeah, so I think it's incredible what Spielberg has given us, and then the fact that he brought Williams in, and Williams has saved kind of these pops orchestras, as we were
Mhm.
talking about, and kept orchestras present in scores, is just incredible. And I actually have a couple students writing papers right now on AI's effect on the music industry. So I've been
Mm.
thinking about it more than I would. And it is going to be really interesting to
Oh,
see what
yeah.
happens in the years to come. I am somebody, my beliefs about AI are that something that takes all of Williams's scores and some kind of large model and replicates it and creates its own version will never quite click, right? It'll always have
Mhm.
that little uncanny valley there, because I
Mm.
do think it matters that you have a human there to do the heart and the soul and kind of give a little spark to that. You in our show prep, you included a very funny video that which is kind of a parody of the fact that well, you first explain what it is, and then I'll say my reading of it, perhaps.
Yeah, so for the listeners at home, I have watched for many years this wonderful skit that a sketch comedy group called The Wise Kids You Know that used to be on a TV show called The Wise Kids You Know on IFC when that channel exists. Remember when we all had cable, everybody? There's an indie channel called IFC, and they would do like a weekly half-hour TV show for many years. One skit that they would do is based off of John Williams, and I guess someone had the idea of like, what does John Williams look like in his everyday household? This documentary kind of gets into it a little bit, which is vastly different than what they expected John Williams to do in his everyday life. But he basically walks around just humming various scores and thinking through like, all right, I need to create a score for the marriage between Short Round and an Ewok is basically the impetus here. And he just drives his family nuts. Uh, challenges his family to a score off, whereas his wife in the skit is like, I don't care about this at all. The only one that really takes any seriousness to it, and he. So that's the impetus for the skit. I hope everyone goes and checks it out. Just Google John Williams "Wise Kids You Know" on YouTube, and you'll find it. But Greg, what did you think
Yeah.
about it?
Well, and I thought it was really funny. I mean, there, you had warned me, so we should warn the listeners. There's a little
Yes,
coarse
little
language
bit of
in it,
language. Yep, it was in
but
2009, so yeah, they
yeah,
were a bit free
yeah.
with some words.
And so that moment is very funny because he's essentially playing like
He's
Halo
playing Xbox.
online and getting trolled by, I assume, a
Probably
9-year-old is how
11-year-olds.
I
Yeah.
picked it. So but what I thought was at the heart of the joke is that it just seems like he's got this divine talent. And there are moments where he says in the documentary, like, yeah, they just kind of come to me, right?
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
think the humor of that sketch is really funny, and it's because it doesn't seem possible that a man who
Could do
could
all
do
this.
these incredible things would also mow his lawn and eat cereal and play Xbox. Well, I'm
Yeah.
not so sure about the Xbox. He
Doubt
does
he doesn't
say
know. He probably doesn't even know what an Xbox is.
no, and he says he doesn't even go to the movies in the documentary, which blew my mind. That he's
Well,
like, oh yeah, I just don't really go. It's not my thing.
not only that, Greg, but he doesn't even like use a computer device to write music. He still
No,
hand writes it. I'm like, this poor
it's
guy. If he
incredible.
does like 15 notes in a row, this is why it takes him forever to do a score. And this guy's doing like 3 scores a year. How how
Yeah,
is this
yeah.
possible? No wonder he must not be spending any time with his kids if that's the way he's doing it. He just doesn't have time logistically.
Yeah. Well, and it's I think there are I mean, Star Wars itself has a bunch of composers who have come up and would credit John Williams with the reason they are doing music, the Michael Giacchinos, the Kevin
Hmm.
Kiners,
Hmm.
these incredible composers in their own right that have come up because of that. And I think when you ask the question of how they change movie making or culture, as you asked it, as broad as possible, it's that they kept these arts alive, and I think they kept a little humanity
Yeah.
in them. And again, I think it's well known to Star Wars fans, but a reminder that scores weren't doing this when Star Wars came out, right?
No,
And it was the
no.
fact that Star Wars brought it back that you then get that incredible Spielberg run in the '80s, where all these scores are so deeply embedded in our culture. And I no shade on like the Avengers movies. I think there are really good score movies in a lot of Marvel and some of the DC and so on. But I do think it is interesting to watch as we kind of transition on, and
Mhm,
everybody
mhm.
likes a good needle drop in a song in a movie
Sure.
too. And it's interesting that symphonies have lasted this long as a scoring device,
Mhm.
and I'm curious to see when we lose some of these grandmasters if that stays in our culture or not. Not that I mean, like you said, if we can donate our own blood and organs to keep John Williams alive,
I
I
will.
I will happily contribute. I have
Yeah.
nothing nearly as cool as his next score in me, so he can have whatever he needs.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry, John Williams. Like you, I will make you episode 9 Palpatine if I need to, and I will pump you with whatever fluids that they were keeping him alive with. uh,
Well, and I just want to check. I think you said when we were on the last episode, you were in the room for the Kenobi premiere where they
I was.
surprised us with John Williams. So you've seen
Yes,
John Williams conduct it also.
I have. Yes, that was the greatest free gift ever. Right. I immediately said to my wife, Mrs. Forska's conversations, I was like, this paid for the ticket alone. This flight out to
Yeah.
Anaheim, the hotel. We got a free John Williams concert as a result of this. Like, this is a once in a lifetime experience. This guy doesn't get out of bed for nothing,
Yeah.
especially at his
Well,
age.
I almost didn't make that trip because my wife got COVID the week before,
Oh,
and it was the moment between
so
when we were
close.
buying houses, and so we actually owned 2 houses for like a week, right? And it
Oh,
was the
man.
week she needed to isolate, so I threw her in this house and stayed at our old house,
You
and
were testing every
the
day.
yeah, yeah, and I was so convinced that it had fallen apart, and my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, came through and took care of the kids and said, it's been a hard year. You deserve this trip. Like, I want you to go.
Mm-hmm.
And, she puts up with my Star Wars, but doesn't understand
Hey,
me,
yeah,
period.
yes.
And
That's
yet
why you
she
have a
loves
room of this.
right, exactly, why I'm safely in the basement. And yet when I got to say when I got back, she's like, "Well, how was it?" I was like, "I was in the room to listen to John Williams conduct a world premiere
Yes.
of his new composition that was created for my favorite Star Wars character of all time." I said,
Yep.
"I will never be more okay. Like, whatever happens, whatever I don't get into in the future for Star Wars, and
Yep.
whatever other opportunities they give to the influencer types and I don't get or whatever, I don't care. I
It's
had this
over. Yeah.
incredible gift, like you
It's not going
said.
to get any
It was
better.
so perfect. And that's why I mean, I know when I did our rankings, I have to push Andor up just because it is so good, but it's like my heart is with Kenobi forever because that was just the perfect experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I think like I don't even remember the music of the Obi-Wan Kenobi score that first time. I'm glad that people secretly took out cameras and recorded it somehow,
Yeah.
because I feel like I was just on a cloud watching this man move his hands in
Yeah.
baton. I was like, oh crap, I should have been paying attention because this is a world premiere score right now. I said, oh, it's okay. There's 6 episodes I can rewatch as much as I want
Yeah,
that'll
you'll
have
get
the
it.
theme included in there. It's all good. Just enjoy the moment. And then, of
Yeah.
course, he goes into the Raiders March because they bring out Harrison and James
Oh,
Mangold for a little bit there, and then concludes with the Imperial March. And it's like, wow, if I could get a medley of Harrison Ford and all this great stuff in a John Williams free concert, I'll take it.
yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
awesome.
and this question is not in your show notes, but if pressed, as much as I love Star Wars, and listeners who are my best friends can't see my background, but no, I have an incredible Star Wars collection visible behind me. If I had to pick one John Williams song all time, it's got to be the Raiders March. And to hear
Really?
that live, I think is just it was so special. And with Harrison standing there, I mean,
Yeah.
come on. Yeah,
And
it was a dream.
I was this close again. He was not feeling well, but at D23, he was inducted as a legend this
Oh,
year.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they concluded the ceremony with a orchestra performance of a few of his hits from the Disney era, which included some Star Wars stuff, and then of course then switched over to Raiders and the Marion's theme, and all that
Mm.
stuff. He was not feeling well, so he did not appear. So they had someone else guest conduct in his place. But I was like, I was this close
Ah.
to seeing him again. Another free show.
And fans have pointed out that Lucasfilm has played this trick like 4 times, and it's
Yeah.
like nobody cares. Keep playing this trick. we
That's
we
right.
love this trick.
That's right. We'll never get tired of it. Keep doing it. As long as this man is alive, again, I will pump the whatever fluids we need to keep this man
Yeah.
alive. The dark side of the force leads to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. I will find whatever. I will stop those I love from dying, and it'll be John Williams. And also Steven Spielberg, because again, like we were saying, this marriage, in a way, saved the arts, the popular arts in many ways.
Yeah.
Cinema was not the art form that it is until the blockbuster exists, right? People weren't going to the cinema. They were, jaded to the cinema in a way. It was a reflection of American life post Vietnam and post Watergate, right? They were having stories that were also down in the dumps, like Chinatown, and The Godfather, right? These stories that were darker and more gritty and more, the French Connection too. Like, these are great films in their own right, but they were not focused on like uplifting and the hopefulness that brings out the masses. Jaws isn't necessarily the most hopeful and uplifting film, but it is that technically first blockbuster that is the first time that these two really, in a way, save cinema, that leads to the first domino dropping, that then leads to Star Wars, that then leads to Close Encounters, that then leads to Raiders, that then leads to E.T., that leads to Empire, that leads all this stuff and everything henceforth. And that's just the beginning of their career there. It's crazy that, like, if any other person that's a composer, if you could just pick 2 from John Williams's esteemed career, and even Spielberg too, if you could pick just 2 of them, you'd be fine. You'd retire and be a happy person, right? But then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, he also did Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Oh, he also did Jurassic Park. Oh, he also did Schindler's List in the same year. Oh, he also did Memoirs of a Geisha. Oh, he also did Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Oh,
Yeah.
just keep adding to this list, and you're like, oh,
Unbelievable.
man, what hasn't John Williams done? That's the better question at this point.
Yeah.
So the fact that these two are constantly pushing each other, which I think is really respectfully done well in the documentary, right? He's like, I need a theme for Jaws, and they talk about temp music and how that usually is like the director being like, this is kind of what I'm thinking here, and then the musician will come in and do something kind of in that mold, right? They're kind of influenced by what is presented there. But I like how this is like the good part of a marriage in a way where you push each other,
Mm.
and you know when to push each other's buttons, right? I don't know if there's any other person that comes up to Spielberg and says, "No, you're wrong here. The theme for Jaws is a pirate movie. It needs to have a swashbuckling adventure theme." And I'm like, "Yes, of course, that's right. How could it be any different there? I love Jaws. I've got you don't see the poster, but it's up here,
Mm.
in my studio here. I watch it twice a year, once to July
Nice.
4th, and I find some other time to squeeze it in there. It's a film that I unapologetically love everything about, and the themes that are presented, especially once they go off in the orca and go into the unknown of whatever is out there to face the shark, which I think
Yeah.
is, the first half is horror, and then the second half is these three guys that are unlikely to become best friends that somehow become best friends at the because of the shark. They face their fears, they overcome those fears, and they face the shark together, and they emerge as victorious heroes in this story here. But the fact that you don't find many people these days, like, I don't know if a Ludwig Göransson, for example, would be so cavalier to say like, no, you're wrong in interpreting your scene here, John Favreau.
Mm.
I think the music should have this. And so I think it's really awesome. I love that, like a Close Encounters doesn't work if the music doesn't fit it. Like that film
Mm.
is driven by music. It is the
Mm.
heart and soul of that, not literally, but the plot is music. If it's not them figuring out the five notes that are the ways that they can communicate with the spaceship, they can't communicate with the aliens. There's nothing. They
Yeah.
fly away, nothing happens there, and it's a boring story afterwards. But it's exactly it. Daring, and then of course the Spielberg being like, "Hey, you should check out Johnny Williams," and
Mm.
that's how Star Wars comes out. And now that I find that the documentary does a fantastic job of showcasing the one time where Lucas checks Williams there with the Binary Sunset alternate take. My mind was blown hearing a different version of that and being like, "Oh my god, that could have been it. History would have been different for the worse because of that."
Yeah, I had a post I was scribbling on, and I don't think you can read it, but it says unused binary queue, and it's
Yeah,
like 3 exclamation points because I had no idea that had happened, and yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, that it does show the power of a good collaborator. You
yeah,
push and you take and you listen at times, and this was, George could tell this was an important moment. Again, when you put up the original Star Wars, it's like the quietest moment in A New Hope, but it is so many people's favorite moment because it's the spirit of the whole film,
yeah,
with just a gorgeous shot against the sunset, and Luke looking out. And I had no idea there was an alternative queue. I'm also a big fan of David W. Collins, and he's done a
hmm
lot of Star Wars work. And I know I've heard him many times bring up a lot of the cues that were lost out of Empire that were cut out. So I've heard a lot of those music cues, and he on his show will restore them
yeah.
into the soundtrack and kind of show you what they would have sounded like. But I don't recall him doing the alternative take on the Binary Suns. This was all
Neither
new to
do I.
me.
Yeah.
And so, like, the film's on, I have my phone around, somebody's yelling because they need a snack or something. And then I'm like, oh my God, they just cut to the Binary Suns with a different music track. And it blew my mind. And I think both of them are correct that it took Lucas to push him and say that isn't right. But it then took the genius of Williams to figure out the right cue. And
Yeah.
it's,
And
cinema history. That'll be
literally,
what they show on the memorial reel for both of those two,
it will
someday.
be. It will be.
Yeah.
And speaking of unfortunately memorial reels one day, the ET might
Yeah.
be the magnum opus for both of these guys because both are pushed to the point where they're at their best arguably in this. I had just watched
Mm,
ET 2 nights ago in prep for Skeleton
nice.
Crew, but also kind of prep for this conversation too because ET only works because of the wonderful direction that Steven Spielberg is able to give those kid actors, that you believe everything and you believe the puppet of ET, and the story just works in a thematic sense. but also the music provides it with that whimsical nature, the heart, and the humor and the drive that it needs in order to keep the pacing going and to also keep it in this childlike sense of wonder that the tone absolutely works for of that movie. If any of those pieces are off, the film fails and it doesn't become one of the most successful films of all time. But because both are like literally at the height of their game, and we think they're at the height of their game, boy, they have 40 plus years of career afterwards where they're still outdoing themselves all the time. But if you're like, I need to think of throw a dart on what their best film collaboration might be, arguably it could be E.T. because of everything like I just mentioned there. Do you have any thoughts on the E.T. of it all?
It's an incredible piece of music, like the main theme. I mean,
Yeah,
it's all good all the way through. And we were singing its praises in prep for Skeleton Crew because my co-host Greg on
that's
Rebel
right.
Base Card has never seen ET. I'm still not over that, and I know he's gonna be listening to this show. So Greg, turn this off, go
That's right.
watch ET, and we'll be here when you get back.
This is
Uh,
your warning.
yeah, but it's interesting because I think because ET didn't turn into a franchise, our beloved
Mhm.
Universal
Hey,
Studios
yep.
ride aside, it
Oof.
didn't become something that there's 10 ET films. So I think people forget about it. And I would put myself in that category in terms of showing things to my son. I was like, we have to watch Star Wars. And then last
Mhm.
year I was like, all right, you're older, it's a little iffier, but let's do some Indiana Jones because you're gonna love this.
That's right.
And we've done Back to the Future to again that other trilogy, and we did Lord of the Rings last year, all these trilogies.
Mm.
And it's like I forgot about ET, and I've really in the run up to Skeleton Crew been like, okay, he's 9. I'm like, this is perfect. Like you got to see ET and understand how beautiful this film is. So
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to sharing that as well. And I know that we're bleeding into the question of what are your favorite scores. And
I
a
know.
moment ago, I identified a single track because you didn't ask that question.
Mhm.
But as we start to think about favorite scores, I would absolutely put ET up there. And I cannot help but look over your shoulder at your second poster that's visible and say Jurassic Park because Jurassic Park has some incredible bangers to steal the
Oh, yeah.
parlance of the kids in it, and they don't show a lot of Jurassic Park, but the moment where the
Mhm,
Brachiosaurus is
mhm.
revealed, is just
It
like
gets me every time.
so incredible, yeah. And I remember when that film came out on VHS, I was in a Walmart, and you know how it plays on like 20 TVs at
Mhm,
once. And I'd seen it in the theater, but then like it was the helicopter at the end flying away, and I remember hearing all the
mhm.
TVs doing the music, and it was just like that score is incredible. And
Yeah,
I
and
think
that's just the
the
piano at the end there too, that's the best
oh,
part.
that's right, yeah, yeah, the mournful piano. So I would start with those two as being among my tops. What
Okay.
ranks high for you?
Well, we'll get to those in a second here. I
Oh,
wanted to
okay,
add one
all
more
right.
bit about the
Oh, sorry.
Spielberg and Williams relationship, where I do like that as they quote unquote mature. I know John Williams is already like 20 years his senior by the time they meet, but
Mhm.
as quote unquote Spielberg matures in his career, right, he then moves to Empire of the Sun and then to Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan and Amistad and uh, AI, Minority Report, so on and so forth. That Williams also grows with it too in many ways. Now, Williams is a classical composer in many ways, based off of the Steingold and all those guys from the 30s or public serials that really they wanted for this endeavor they were setting out to do. Williams and Spielberg and Lucas. Um, but as they kind of grow, like he's also getting more sophisticated, not necessarily adding like techno synths and stuff that you might hear in the work from musicians these days, but like I think like when he adds the when he's feels like John Williams wants to get a little spicy, I think, or and different, he'll add a chorus to stuff. And I think that's how you
Mhm.
get like Duel of the Fates. That's how you get the Hymn to the Fallen in Saving Private Ryan. That's how you get the haunting ending of Schindler's List. That's how you get a lot of the stuff from the prequels. I would argue is with when he starts adding the chorus into stuff, and he's done that with many of these films beyond, such as Lincoln and Warhorse and The Post.
Yeah,
Hopefully, one day you get to The Post. I think that's a really
I'll
good
get
one.
there.
Another hard one to find.
Yeah.
And then eventually you get to this point where we're existing here in 2024, where these guys have been together for so long that literally Steven Spielberg makes a movie about his own life, and John Williams is scoring. He provides a theme for Steven Spielberg and the Fablemans, and then to return the favor with a documentary about John Williams from Steven Spielberg, I think is just so poetically beautiful. Like, I don't want their careers to be over, but if there's a way, if it has to end at some point, I feel like this is a nice gift to each other that we both have these wonderful films and collections of their stories at the end of all things. So that's that, and I think that's a great segue into our top conversation here about some of these like scores that John Williams has done, where we would perhaps rank a few of these things here. So
Uh,
you've said two already. I don't want to go ahead there if you had another
Well,
thought.
I was just gonna say I was trying to double check this very quickly with IMDb open, but I'm pretty sure there is a credit on to continue that trend you said. I'm pretty sure there was a credit on the documentary that said the music was by John Williams for the documentary.
Oh,
So
I mean, there wasn't any.
there is a little extra in there. I mean, it's mostly a clip show, but I think
Yeah.
there was a little bit of theme in there that he had invented just for this. So it doesn't stop.
Can you imagine
Um,
him having to hand write his own theme? Sweet.
Just at that point, it's the Norman Rockwell of the artist looking at himself leaning in the
Oh,
mirror.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful.
All right. So E.T. in Jurassic Park, and you really, I think this is gonna be my hottest take of the evening. I think if you pressed me really hard, I might take the 3 prequel soundtracks over the 3 OT
You're not
soundtracks.
wrong. You're not wrong.
I think when at the 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace, there was a lot of talk about how maybe that's the best single film Star Wars soundtrack. And
I would argue that.
I like those. I like that case, but I would say of the 2 trilogies, you're never going to be, the main theme and the Imperial March are incredible. Of course, I love the Force theme, which I call Kenobi's theme, although now
Mhm.
Kenobi has his own theme.
Yeah.
But I do think like the 3 they're CDs to me because that's how I bought them at the time. The 3 CDs of the prequels are to me like really iconic, and it's hard to I you know I tend to be more of a Battle of the Heroes guy than Duel of the Fates, although
You're in great company here.
the mixing of the 2 in the actual film is pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. Yeah, you are in great company when it comes to the praise of Revenge of the Sith and its score, which I would argue is John Williams' best work. I feel
All
like it's
right.
a retrospective of his entire career,
Mm,
because Revenge of the Sith, because it was viewed at the time as the final Star Wars film, and the transition piece between the prequels to the original, it infuses everything from those films, plus everything from the 2 prior prequel films. Plus, it has its own wonderful like bits of score here. So it's got like
yeah.
Padme's ruminations. It's got Anakin's dark deeds. It's got Anakin's betrayal. The opening score is, I think, fantastic with the
Those
crawl and then
drums.
leading off in the dun 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 dun, and then
Yeah.
leading straight into the battle over Coruscant, which I think is spectacular. And then it ends with like the when it goes to the credits, it has the ultimate fanfare of like Battle of the Heroes, and leads to Leia's theme, then leads to the throne room sequence, and it's like it's got everything. It's a hodgepodge
Yeah.
of all the wonderful Star Wars scores thrown into one, and I think it helps to weave that beautiful story together in such a fantastic way. So great work on acknowledging the power of Revenge of the Sith. Even though I would
Mm,
argue, I think the single greatest track that he's ever done, aside from probably the flying theme from ET, is Across the Stars, the
mm,
love theme
yeah.
from Attack of the Clones, which I think is just one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever created. So I would say that one, Revenge of the Sith, is one of my favorite scores. I think Jaws is up there just because it beautifully blends horror and swashbuckling adventure in such a great way, that I think is stands the test of time over 50. Golly gee, we're celebrating 50 years of Jaws next year. Can't believe that's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
So I would also say Lincoln is up there. I think
Okay.
Lincoln is the one, probably the most underrated John Williams score to ever exist. So if anyone hasn't seen Lincoln, I know it's another hard one to find out there.
Mm,
So make sure you all can somehow track down that film if you can. There's a lot of great actors in it. You won't be disappointed. Daniel Day-Lewis won the Oscar for that one,
Yeah.
best actor, and I think Spielberg might have won best director that year too because of that. I can't remember exactly. It was that 2012 range. Maybe I'm off there. Maybe it was someone
I think that
else.
might not be right, but
Might
he
not
was
be right.
definitely nominated. But
Yeah, it
I would say I saw Lincoln in the theater when it came out. I haven't revisited it
was a great
since,
Christmas
but
Day watch.
yeah, true. I think like the extended family went. I didn't remember it, but it gets a great little moment. They kind of lump together Lincoln, Amistad, and Saving Private Ryan
Yes.
as kind of three big historical scores, and it was a reminder of how kind of haunting those themes are. And I was like, oh yeah, I should revisit those.
Yeah, yeah, and I will tell you, I go to my job is in DC, so I have to go to DC maybe about once a quarter for various work things. And when I'm there, I will stumble over to the Ford's Theater area, and I
Mm.
will play the Lincoln soundtrack as I'm walking through, and it helps to put me in this sense of liminality where I'm like, okay, I am feeling the emotions of this incredible historical figure, and I see Ford's Theater. I see where he was shot. I see across the street where the Peterson house is, where he actually passes away the following
Mhm.
morning. Um, and it just helps to put me in that time and space where I'm able to reflect and think about things in a way that the normal human being isn't just walking by and just going, "Oh, there's that," and then checking it off the list
Yeah,
as
yeah.
they're going through their DC field trip. And to that same degree too, I would also put Saving Private Ryan on there because of the way it's able to
Mm.
capture the horror, humanity, and just the, the the terrors of the Second World War, and that love letter it is to the Greatest Generation. Arguably, it's fantastic. I was also in Normandy a few months ago
Oh yeah.
to for just being there and to acknowledge and reflect on the past, and of course I was playing the Saving Private Ryan soundtrack as I was walking through the hedgerows,
Mm.
to also put me in that time and space where I feel like John Williams is giving me permission to reflect on the last 80 years and to think what are the sacrifices that people have made in this time that we now live today. And it's not a perfect world, but how can we improve the world that was left behind from them now that that generation is passing on? um, Wonderful that music is able to do that for us. And the last one that I will say that I think is just absolutely spectacular again, and the documentary really talks about this a lot, is Schindler's List, where he's like,
Mm.
I didn't feel comfortable doing this. I shouldn't be the one doing that. And Spielberg's like, the ones that could, you're right. The ones that should be doing it are all dead. So you're the only one left. I know it's a tongue in cheek joke about it and trying to make light of a dark situation, but he's absolutely right. So therefore, someone has to take up the mantle, and who better than John Williams to
Yeah.
reflect on this and to give the Holocaust a theme in a way, which he's actually doing there, which is a horrible thing to even say, but also honest in the fact that it is also true in the same regards.
Yeah.
Um, and he's able to capture every emotion that I think comes up when one thinks about the Holocaust and the atrocities that took place over those many years in Germany and across Europe. Um, and the fact that he's able to do that and Jurassic Park in the same year in months of each other. I mean, it's crazy to think that Spielberg could even do that. But the fact that John Williams is also creating two of the best works of musical film score in the history of all time in the same time frame too. I mean, like, we don't give enough credit to Williams for doing that too, which I'm glad that this
Yeah.
documentary finally gives him his day in the sun.
Yeah, and it's really striking that Itzhak Perlman, the violinist, talks about how
Hmm.
often he plays that song. Essentially, that
He's
it
like, I
is,
can't go anywhere without
well in
playing it.
demand. Yeah, yeah. So clearly, it achieved its job that you just described, as crazy as it seems, but giving some kind of voice to the Holocaust and the tragedy of it, but the hope and the life of it as
It
well,
certainly
of
is.
those who
Yeah.
survived it. So, yeah. And I mean, I feel like we could list like 100 more and still only be in his top 10%.
Yeah. We'll
Like
even talk about
it's
Memoirs of a
crazy.
Geisha. Come on, guys.
But well, and there's so many Spielberg movies like Warhorse. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
like, oh,
Warhorse and the
right,
Adventures of
Warhorse
Tintin.
exists. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's not like John Williams ever phones it in, right?
No.
The one time I'm gonna maybe argue is
Midway.
the last act of Last Jedi, which I love, is really
Really?
just some greatest hits, right? Like he plays with when Chewbacca flies the Falcon into the crate ice cave, crystal cave, and you're like, wait, this is not some new cool song. This is just the old song again. There's just a few moments kind of like that where I think Ryan had scored it with old Star Wars cues,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
for whatever reason, John Williams was like, well, that's a good idea. I think I'll go with that one, baby. And just did his old greatest hits. So that's like, yeah, I don't accept most Last Jedi criticism, but if somebody actually points out like the score is actually one of the weaker of the 9 discs, I can't really argue with that one.
I mean, it's
So
okay. He was doing
sorry.
the father sequence, which was
That's true. That swell as they jump out on the beach is a really good cue. So
yeah.
you're right. You're right.
And he did the moment where Luke goes out there and he has that kind of alternative take on the
All
Imperial
right,
March there
Anthony. That's
too. Hey,
pretty incredible too. All right.
yeah,
All right.
yeah, I'll
Yeah, you're
defend a
right.
little
You're
bit there.
right.
I'll do a little bit of the Williams pushback. if I
Yeah,
can.
that boom, bum, 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 bum.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good stuff. You're right. You're right. All right. All right. All right. According to the results, The Last Jedi is flawless. There it is. Take that, internet. It's still flawless.
A man that was doing 2 films at the same time for The Last Jedi and The Post, 2 films out at the same time.
Great. I
Crazy.
got to see The Post
You gotta
for
see The
that reason
Post.
alone.
Only a man that can make the film about papers and the power of the press, which we might need more than ever these days.
True.
It comes back to surface again for how important it is. Yeah, Tom
Although
Hanks and Meryl Streep. This is your.
in my defense, I did hear Tom Hanks
Is he
on, I
phoning it
believe
in?
he was on Conan the other day. He was he was listing the movies he's done with Spielberg, and he said 3, and then like 10 minutes later, he's like, oh wait, we did The Post together too. 4, we've done 4. So Tom Hanks forgets The Post as well. So, but loved it, and another great collaborator with Spielberg, obviously. So it
Yes.
seems like it's fun to work with Spielberg
Yes.
from all accounts.
I think everyone is like, how can I work with Spielberg? How can I do it? Like we said, this man not only does all the films that he does where he's behind the director's chair, but also his like extensive longer list of producing and executive producing projects that have also changed the course of cinema too, even up to the most recent one, which I think was Masters of the Air. Again, not just movies, but he's also doing TV. Where we've talked before, Apple TV is just throwing money at things, and they were somehow able to get that trilogy of World War II projects now. With the conclusion of that, hopefully not the conclusion, because I think they have more ideas. But Masters of the Air, another good watch, which
Nice.
has Steven Spielberg's son in it too, Sawyer. So yeah, there's that. Anywho,
well, and Spielberg producing on Dial of Destiny. I love those stories of Mangold being like, I thought he would just like sign off on the cut, but he was watching dailies and sending me notes. It's like, yeah, I can see that's the level Spielberg wanted to be involved with. That makes sense.
Yeah, there's definitely. I don't think he's able to just like have his hands off on a thing. I'm glad. Personally, I think the film is for the better because he has more involvement, because it feels more connected to the films that came before, especially for that one. The other thing too, I wanted to note before we moved on here is I believe there are 2 films that are just the movie to score that you can watch on Disney Plus, which are The Last Jedi, another one in its defense. They wouldn't have done that if it wasn't a good score. And the Dial of Destiny 2 they have a score only version of that on Disney Plus too. So I think you might have some homework, Greg, in The Post and the.
I mean, as soon as the John Williams documentary was done, I actually finished it in my office this afternoon. It was office hours, and immediately Disney Plus was like, don't you want to watch Dial of Destiny? And I was like, I do want to watch.
How did you know?
Of Destiny.
How did you know?
You know me, Disney Plus. You know me too well. So I
Wow.
did slide in. I only made like a half hour because then office hours were over. But I got a little Dial of Destiny in, which is.
I'm glad that yours led straight to Dial of Destiny, because mine was like, you might like Captain Marvel. And I was like, I don't see how these 2 are related at all. That doesn't.
He didn't do the music for this.
He didn't do anything close to this. So
too funny.
The film composers of Now and Tomorrow, how do you think that the legacy of John Williams will influence their work as time goes on? Because unfortunately, John Williams, as much as I would very much like to, he won't be with us forever. But his legacy will be with us forever in many ways. So how do you think that his influence will be felt in the people that are carrying on afterwards?
Well, in our IP-driven culture, we're not going to be without his themes for a long time, right? I mean,
I know.
any
I can't
Star
go to
Wars
Universal
project.
Studios without hearing every John Williams score possible.
Yeah, well, and I've mentioned Back to the Future a few times. It was the Universal Studios commercials that made me so used to that
Hmm.
for a long time. But I do think that he has such a prolific shadow that all the kind of masters of the moment right now are working within that shadow, and always give him a lot of reverence and due respect. You mentioned Ludwig earlier in this episode, and I think of Ludwig as that real next generation. He's not
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
trying to be John Williams, but he's really doing different things. No disrespect to Mando, but I think primarily of Black Panther with Ludwig and
Sure.
that incredible Oscar-winning score,
And
and
Oppenheimer now too. Yeah.
yeah. Yo, yeah. Oh, I forgot he did Oppenheimer. So it's really wonderful to see somebody who can kind of continue that legacy on. There's a moment in the documentary where John Williams says, like, well, and new instruments and new synths and new technology are coming in. And he says, like, I'm sorry I won't be around to see what the smart young people do with those things.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is his legacy. Is he loves music so much, he just wants the music to keep
Hmm.
playing. And
Hmm.
he has a beautiful thought at the end of the documentary about how, life is not long enough for all the music that he wanted to create,
Yeah.
and or to listen or to enjoy, all just a life of music. And I do think, it is sweetly beautiful that the music will go on and his music will go on. And
Hmm. Hmm.
I think he is in that tier of, like, he has achieved the closest thing we have to immortality. I mean, there's no way 1,000 years from now someone's not doing whatever they do with music and finding a John Williams song in there. And that's pretty incredible that of all the humans who lived, we got to live at the same time as him and
Hmm.
enjoy him creating these great works.
Are you afraid that the AI generator of the future will just take every score that he's done and then we'll just like a new Star Wars film is out, give it the AI generated John
Oh,
Williams score to match
I
over it?
don't I don't want to sound so naive that I think that's impossible, but it's like I have to be deep down on, well, I shouldn't record this because the computer model AI is going to suck this up into the ether. But deep down, I have to believe that humans are still necessary. And as good as,
Hmm.
the joke going around the internet is right. We should be training the AI to do our work so that we can go create more art, not
Yeah.
to do the art so that we can go
Yeah.
do more work. And
Yeah.
and I do think, while I'm sure somebody already has a model doing that and trying it, I have to imagine, like, Spielberg points out in Raiders, John Williams scores the individual snakes.
Hmm.
David Collins calls it Mickey Mouses,
Mickey
right?
Mousing.
He
Yeah.
Mickey Mouses the snakes, and you're like, yeah, no AI could think to do that or would do that. You need that whimsy, to steal your word from the opening, and
Yeah.
it's got to be there.
Yeah. No AI created score is going to do the Jaws pushback in a way,
Yeah,
or the five
true.
notes in Close Encounters. Right? It's
Yeah.
not going to do that. Just him on his piano being like doo 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 doo. Or if you take the skit from Why Is Kid You Know, it's just him in his bed going bum 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 bum
Bump.
bum 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 bum. I I think that there won't be another John Williams, right? I think
Mm,
that
I think
is
that's right.
this the music that he creates isn't seen in film today. Aside, like, there's only one John Williams. He was told to do a task and he got really good at doing that. Like, Spielberg had this idea for bringing in romanticized film scores of the 30s and 40s back into the cinema again, as they had gone away and moved to more disco things of the 70s and just kind of stayed more in the mold of whatever like was popular at the time. And they said, let's do the unpopular thing by feeding into nostalgia, which is basically what they recreated with those films of the 80s and 90s and now today. um, so I don't think that there will be another John Williams ever again in the same vein of like doing these romantic scores. But like you said, the score, like the themes will continue, right? The Star Wars theme will always exist, and Ludwig Göransson or Kevin Kiner or Joseph Shirley or Mick Giacchino who's now doing
Yeah.
Skeleton Crew, will have to
Second
pull from
generation
that. Yeah,
Giacchino.
exactly. So we got
Yeah.
two Giachinos now, two Utah. Um, and so like as time goes on and they create Jaws 30, like they predict one day, and Back to the Future, they will you know keep pulling from his music, and he always will inspire people. I love randomly to throw Coldplay in this thing, or
Yeah.
the the guy
Definitely
who
the strangest one, Chris
my
Martin.
I
Yeah.
was like, why
Yeah.
is he in here? Okay, well, maybe he just like I know Seth MacFarlane is in here for a valid reason.
Yeah.
And why is Chris Martin in this? And then he's like, oh, we come out to every show with the ET flying theme. I'm like, oh, well, I would never know that. I'm
All
never
right.
going to a Coldplay show, but now I have this
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So maybe as people go on, we just find other ways to add John Williams to our everyday lives, and perhaps his score will be used in temp things for the future, and then that will be the way that influences of his will be around for a lifetime and lifetime and lifetimes beyond us. But most importantly, I'm glad that we got to live during the heyday of John Williams.
Yeah.
I always remark how, I don't know if this is the same for you too, but like whenever you see a person for the first time, or perhaps I don't know, but for me it's whenever I see a person for the first time, I'm like, that's my John Williams, that's my Spielberg, right? So
Mm.
like I'm thinking like 2004 John Williams, while he's doing the recording for Revenge of the Sith, he still has the black turtleneck on that he's never changed for 40 years now.
Yeah.
Like that John Williams, he's bald, with the white beard, but he's not as old yet. He's 60-year-old,
Mm.
70-year-old John, which I'm like, wow, that's still crazy old. But um that's the John Williams. But also when like we go to Universal Studios and we see like the ET adventure prep show, and it's Steven Spielberg being like, you must help
Mm.
ET. That's like 2002 Steven Spielberg, which I'm like, that's my Spielberg right there. That's the guy that worked,
Yeah.
like I see whenever I watch the behind the scenes features on Saving Private Ryan, like that's the guy that I see. Whenever, if you were to picture Steven Spielberg in my head, that's the guy. So like, to even see John Williams when he's young, like I've never seen John Williams with hair first and foremost. Like, wow, that's
Yeah.
wild.
Kind
And
of
then
red
like to
hair
see him red
too.
hair,
I wasn't expecting that.
as a 10-year-old, and the fact that Frank Marshall's known him since he was 10 wasn't just a hyperbole. Another crazy fact from this thing. But the fact that we get to live in the era of John Williams, and experience it as it's happening, and as it continues to still happen, because he's not seemingly shying away from doing this anytime
Yeah.
soon. Even if he's just laying in bed, probably, and writing out a score for someone else to compose and conduct for him. Um, I'm just thrilled that what we have is a wonderful list of films and scores for those that just are timeless and will be forever in our lexicon of popular culture, which frankly is America in the 20th century. John Williams is America in the 20th century, right?
Yeah.
And with my last question here, Greg, frankly, like we talked about this a little bit earlier, just in passing, but John Williams really only becomes the John Williams that we know after he turns 40, after his wife tragically passes away. So, for those of us who aren't musicians, what is the ultimate lesson to be learned here? That like your career can only like your career is just on the other side, like even at any age, right? Like it's crazy. What do you think, like from like the John Williams experience itself and this documentary what it presents? What's the lesson to be learned from like this guy that seemingly has the best part of his career later in life?
Uh, I really love the lesson you just laid out, which is I do think our culture is so youth obsessed, and we're so into the hot new thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it is a great reminder to a lot of people who feel that kind of middle-aged doldrums that you're not done yet. And
Yeah.
actually, by coincidence, and then my commute today, listened to an interview with Sebastian Stan, and he's
Okay.
42, and he was saying like he feels like this is like the first time as a human he's known who he is, and is
Mm.
now like still has the power and the energy to do whatever he wants. And it
Yeah.
was like this rousing moment where I'm like, I'm 41, like yeah, like I should just dive right in and be as alive as Sebastian Stan, who's doing really crazy good work outside of the MCU and in the MCU, but like
Mhm.
these small roles he takes are so incredible. And so I think it's the same lesson there. But I will add to that. I will yes and your suggestion and say it's a reminder too to live a creative life that,
Mm, love it.
when I get down, I always think, but I got books and I got movies. And,
That's right.
if I can escape whatever is going on in the day to day and enjoy creativity in my own time, create things that give me life, I think, my favorite parts of the Star Wars community are the what the creators are out there doing. If it's, people like yourself on a great podcast, or
Hmm.
the artists or the fanfic writers or the cosplayers, my God, like, it just reminds me that, like, that's, to in my opinion, that's all we're here for at the
Yeah.
end, right? There's an old parable that I'll butcher, but it talks about and it's, I think Lorne Michaels tells this a lot, or
Mm,
maybe it's the head of improv, but Del Close. But um, there's this story of, like, somebody who's a sky dancer. So they
hmm.
parachute in and they float down doing this beautiful dance, and then the parachute opens and they float down. Well, one day the parachute doesn't open, and so
Yeah.
the person, the dancer, just dances. Right? It's straight to the bottom. They know this is it, but they just keep dancing. And I think, to me, that's like this beautiful message about life. And I think John Williams in this documentary is demonstrating that. Like,
Yeah.
he just loves to create. And if what we can do is to create things to bring other people joy and sadness and get them in touch with history or a place like you were talking about, if you can create to do that, like, you have every responsibility to do so, and you'll feel
Hmm.
more alive and everybody will feel more alive. And I just think it's important not to forget that, or not to say, well, nobody cares about me because I'm not hot in my 20s anymore. I should give up. There's a lot more out there than being an influencer. And I think we should
That's
all
right.
remember
That's
that.
right. Hey, we can be an influencer in our own ways. You never know who you're going to meet at lunch tomorrow. It might
That's
be the
true.
next Steven Spielberg, and then you're off on a new adventure in life. Beautiful, beautiful theme there. Always be creative. Like I always tell people, like when they're like, "I'm not creative," I'm like, "Yeah, you are. You just don't know it
Yeah.
yet."
Yeah.
Give yourself
And
permission to be creative, is what I would tell them. Like, draw something, write something, just practice. It's okay not to be
that
perfect first time too.
That's absolutely my day job. Students all the time, they're 18 and they've been told they're not writers. They come in, I'm not a writer. I'm not a good writer. It's like, yes, you
Yeah,
are. You
yeah.
just don't know what you want to write yet, right?
Just
You'll
haven't found
have
it yet.
your story, you'll have your form. So, yeah,
Right,
absolutely. I
write
agree with
what
you.
you know, and like, again, for as to be an 18-year-old, right? Like, where these people are told at like 12 now, you got to figure out what you're doing the rest of your life. Now's when you need to start preparing. You need to know what major you want as soon as you get into college. If you want to do a double major, you need to know as soon as you start applying for your first classes that freshman year. Otherwise, it's
Yeah.
not going to happen, right? And it's like, okay, it's okay to stick to a form, but
Yeah.
most people don't complete that. As time goes on, you find new things. You're like, oh, I like this instead. Oh, I didn't like this. I had this internship. That's not the way I wanted it to go. I'm going to
Mm.
look into this. Oh, I like this job that I had. Let's explore that even further. To have a plan is okay to start, but then it's okay like to enjoy the journey and see where the destination may fluctuate and change. Clearly, John Williams had many careers up in his life until he became a full-time film composer. And then even after that, he wasn't like, I'm just this. I'm going to compose and conduct my own symphonies. I'm going to work at the what that crazy conservatory that they have over in
Yeah.
Boston now. That like whole campus they just teaching. Can you imagine just being like a student and just be like, oh, John Williams is here today. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Teaching kids about stuff and sharing his lessons in life writing for crazy things like TV, the NBC Olympics and the NBC Nightly News and college football and the NBC Sunday Night Football. Clearly he just didn't stop at saying I am a film composer. He kept going and he still does jazz work and all that. And I'm sure he does a lot of fun things that we don't even know that he does. But John Williams is a great model for, I think, just because you are what you think you are doesn't mean that you have to be defined by that forever. You have the power to change how you're viewed, and you don't have to keep going a certain path if you aren't happy with it or you like something else and you want to explore something new. Give yourself permission to do it. I think John Williams is a great model for that.
Absolutely. I'd just say it musically, right? If you don't like
Yes.
the melody, change the tune. You
If
you
you don't
you
like
got it.
if you've never seen E.T., watch it. Looking at you, Greg McLaughlin, and find that wonderful score. And if you don't like the score, then change the channel, and you'll probably find Jurassic Park on, and
Yeah.
then listen to that score. And if you don't like it, then change the channel again, and TNT will probably have the Star Wars marathon on.
Always.
And just keep doing that, and you'll find some John Williams buffet piece that you like today. Um,
Yeah.
Golly gee, before this episode, we didn't even mention Superman, which I think also some might argue is his best work. And that
Yeah.
same window of Star Wars, Close Encounters, Superman,
It's right there. Yeah.
1941.
Yeah. And
um,
a nice Reeves moment in this too,
yeah,
where he says, "I can't fly without John Williams," which is beautifully
absolutely.
put.
I think
Very poetic.
I think that is exactly the way that many people would view that too. Like he gave flying a feeling in many ways, not just the flying theme and poetic sense in the Superman march itself, but also the flying theme, the love theme, perhaps in Superman 1978, and then even the flying theme in ET. There's many flying themes, and then Hook too has
Mhm.
its own flying theme
Yeah.
too. Not to discredit the wonderful work on Hook. Anyways, we
No.
could just go on, but we've talked at length. Almost I think we've talked the same amount of time that the documentary actually is, which I think is a
Pretty
great
close.
place to close up our discussion here. So, Greg, thank you so much for coming on to chat all things music by John Williams, the incredible documentary that is now on Disney Plus. Where can the folks find you? Especially as we start getting into probably your Super Bowl season in many ways. With I know
Ah,
two big releases this weekend, and I know you have kids. Next weekend is probably another big weekend with Moana 2 coming out.
yeah.
You're just in the thick of things. Good thing you're a Stubbs member because you're gonna be using all three, I imagine, all the way through January.
I think so. Yeah. So it is absolutely. We've got a couple sneaky blockbusters this week, even though
Yeah.
we're in the middle of award season, and the both will be awards contenders. So yes, thank you so much. Like I said, it was a joy to watch this week. I think I'll spin it up again. I'm
Hey,
sure before
that's
the week
right.
is out because I want to give it my full attention and see even more of these details and those images. But yes, most of all, right now, people can find me on the Long Take Review, which is a movie podcast. We just recorded The Substance, and tomorrow we're scheduled to record A Real Pain, the new Jesse Eisenberg movie, which is
Oh yeah.
excellent, and Amelia Perez, which is another potential Best Picture contender. So, and then we will have episodes on Gladiator 2, Wicked. I don't know if Moana is on the list, but it should be.
Hey,
I'm
I mean, it
definitely.
might sneak in there.
I think it's our Black Friday viewing for my family because both kids are
Yep.
super excited to go for it. So I think that's what we'll do over Thanksgiving. So always a pleasure to talk. And if people want to reach out, I'm EyeOnCanon, EyeOnCanon on mainly on Instagram these days. I have a Threads account, but I'm trying to cut back a little after the election. See how my mental
Smart.
health is doing, but I might be back there by Christmas time. We'll see. And I got to get on Blue Sky because clearly everybody's on Blue Sky now.
It's the place to be, and hopefully it keeps thriving in the wake of what Hive used to be
Yeah.
before it decided to shut down for 3 weeks unexpectedly. Like, come on, guys.
That was actually my fault because I joined Hive Social and then I got COVID, and my COVID positive test
It
was
broke
the
it
exact
down.
same day it went down. And I'm like, yeah, because I really could use this app while I'm locked alone in my bedroom for a week. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Could use some human connection via the social media. That's what's intended to do, and then of course down it goes. Down goes
Yeah.
Frazier. Um, Anywho, thank you, Greg, so much for coming on, sharing your insights here, and for the folks listening at home, thank you for listening. Go check out Music by John Williams again on Disney Plus. Even though we spoiled a lot of it for you, but there's still many tidbits that we didn't get to in this episode that I think will be fun, fun for you to discover on your own and just to see it through your own eyes too. Of course, we are getting into Skeleton Crew season here on the podcast, so be on the lookout for a lot of great episodes in the near future on that. So stay tuned to Forest Ghost Conversations, wherever you can find your podcast these days. We also, again, we're on Blue Sky, we're on Threads, we're still on X somehow, and we're on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Just search for Forest Ghost Conversations, and you'll find us if you want to continue the conversation there. And until next week, we'll be back with a brand new episode. I think we're going to do a prep episode on Skeleton Crew, so look out for that, folks. Until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.